The St. Louis suburb of Ferguson has seen rioting and looting after a jury decided not to bring charges over the killing of Michael Brown. A police chief said violence in the Missouri town was probably much worse than the worst unrest after the black teenager was killed in August. St. Louis County Police Chief Jon Belmar said rioters had fired 150 shots. Michael Brown was shot by a white police officer, Darren Wilson, on the 9th of August, sparking protests. Many in the African American community had called for Mr. Wilson to be charged with murder, but following lengthy deliberations a grand jury made no recommendation of charges. President Barack Obama joined the teenager's family on Monday in appealing for calm, urging Americans to accept the decision was the grand jury's to make. The BBC's Aleem Maqbool reported seeing more vandalism and looting after Monday's ruling than on any night in August. Out of control. Hours after the initial violence began, a large blaze at one business in Ferguson continued to burn as firefighters battled to bring it under control. "I didn't see a lot of peaceful protest out there tonight, and I'm disappointed about that," Mr. Belmar said. "Unfortunately this spun out of control." Police made 29 arrests, Mr. Belmar said, and there were reports of shops being looted. Most of at least a dozen burned businesses were total losses, he said, and 2 police cars had been basically melted. The fabric of the community, he said, had been torn apart in Ferguson, which is a predominantly black community patrolled by a mainly white police force. "I don't think we were underprepared," he added. "But I'll be honest with you. Unless we bring 10,000 policemen in here, I don't think we can prevent folks who really are intent on destroying a community." Some protesters charged barricades and taunted police. Chants of "murderer" could be heard. Police responded with smoke and tear gas. One protester, Charles Miller, told the BBC that while he did not advocate violence, he understood why people were angry. "You can't just go shoot an 18-year-old who's unarmed on the street, despite what the story may have been," he said. "He was unarmed and you're an armed law enforcement officer who's been trained in combat. So I think people are rightfully upset." After the situation calmed down, he added, he hoped there would be an opportunity to really grow and change a lot of things, and make sure Michael Brown's death didn't mean nothing. Michael Brown killing. Darren Wilson's testimony. Mr. Wilson says he tried to block Mr. Brown and his friend with his police vehicle in connection with the robbery. When he tried to open the car door, Mr. Wilson says Mr. Brown slammed it back shut. The officer says he then pushed Mr. Brown with the door but was hit in the face by Mr. Brown. When he drew his gun, he says, Mr. Brown grabbed it and insulted him. A shot went through the police car window and Mr. Brown stepped back, he says, but looked at him with the most intense, aggressive face. He fired 2 more shots in the car before Mr. Brown ran off, he says. Mr. Brown stopped, the officer says, and was told to get on the ground. Instead he advanced on Mr. Wilson, putting his right hand under his shirt in the waistband of his trousers. Mr. Wilson opened fire on Mr. Brown. Heart and soul. Explaining the juror's decision, State Prosecutor Robert McCulloch said their job had been to separate fact from fiction, and that some witness statements had been contradicted by physical evidence. These grand jurors poured their hearts and soul into this process, he said. Protesters have been chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot," a reference to statements by some witnesses who said Mr. Brown had his hands up in apparent surrender to the officer when he was shot. Police say there was a struggle between the teenager and the officer before the shooting. In his own testimony, Mr. Wilson says that before the shooting Mr. Brown pushed him back into his car, hit him and briefly grabbed his drawn gun. The jury was made up of 12 randomly picked citizens, 9 white and 3 black. At least 9 votes were needed in order to issue an indictment.